administration officials out saying they checked with economists. Everyone said we need a stimulus package. Sort of forgot to call me or what, I don't know. But it seemed to me quite clear that that wasn't going to be too helpful. And in my view, it has not been. How do I know this? Well, I just look at the data. So again, think of, part of this was sending checks to people. Smaller checks this time because we did more spending. Checks were sent, income went up, income went down, consumption didn't move. In fact, in this case, consumption just really slowed down. In fact, so this intervention doesn't help stimulate the economy. There's also some government spending part of this intervention. In the first year when things were worse, of the 700, in this case, 787 billion in that package originally passed, 21 billion. 21 of 787, which actually spent on infrastructure, building roads and bridges. No wonder you haven't seen much effect of this. The economy turned around not because of the stimulus package, but because of the changes of investment in inventory, the natural flows of the economy. Of course, the package has increased the debt by these amounts, 787 plus interest, close to $1 trillion. So it's another example where the effects are supposed to be good, but in fact it's another example of my great deviation. I'll guide me down the list. Next on my list will be, I'll call it the contagion of deviations. In April of last year, there was a meeting of something called the G20, Group of 20. G20 consists of the major industrial countries like France and Great Britain and Italy, Japan, Germany, but it also consists of these large emerging market countries, Brazil, China, Turkey, India, so there's 20 of them. So at this meeting, the agreement was that we'll all have stimulus packages. We'll all do what the United States has already started to do and others started to do. We will all try to send checks or stimulate with spending. It will always increase the debt. And yes, Greece was part of that operation, not in the G20, but as far as the European Union. So this was another item in this great deviation. Again, an intervention, kind of things that we had not done for many, many years in the past, an intervention trying to help the economy, and in my view, didn't do much good, but in fact, increased the debt even more. So you can see the steam here, and this is not a coincidence. This is a change in the policy. I wrote down healthcare as the next on my item. Now, the healthcare bill is another entitlement, which is costing a lot of money. It does the same kind of things as these other items. It's going to be increasing the deficit and increasing the debt. It's going exactly in the wrong direction. So to me, it's another example of this great deviation policy. Next on my list, back to the Federal Reserve. In early 2009, early last year, the Federal Reserve did things even more unusual than it did when it bailed out Bear Stearns and AIG by printing money. In this case, they printed money in order to purchase mortgages. In fact, they purchased $1.25 trillion worth of mortgages. The Federal Reserve, which we normally think of, the institution that tries to keep our economy stable, keep inflation low, went into a particular market, in this case the mortgage market, and bought $1.25 trillion. And again, the way they do this, technically, is by printing money. They don't literally take pieces of paper and print the dollar bills, but they credit commercial banks, and those commercial banks then hold this money, and this $1.25 trillion is created and now actually held in commercial banks. So it's financed by the creation of money. If you look at the details of this particular intervention, it's hard to see any reduction in mortgage interest rates from this. Mortgage interest rates have gone up and down. They're now down a little because of more fears in Europe, bringing interest rates in general down. But you don't see any impact of this large mortgage-backed securities purchase program on interest rates. So it doesn't seem to be doing much good as I analyzed it with the data. But in the meantime, it has left this overhang, I'll call it a monetary overhang, of over $1 trillion of outstanding money, which is potentially very inflationary. So that has to be somehow drawn out of the economy. and now it's, in the meantime, it's an inflationary threat. I call that a monetary overhang. Another example of the great deviation. Let me now sort of bring this very close to the present and see how these items actually are creating a legacy that we need to worry about. And I want to focus on, go back to Greece and to Europe. Just a few weeks ago, there's yet another bailout package, another huge government intervention took place. In this case, centered in Europe. So $1 trillion program was put in place in order to help countries which have run up too much debt, emphasis of debt. Greece, Portugal, Spain, and to some extent Ireland. So the larger countries in Europe decided to actually spend $1 trillion to support the debt run up by the other countries. Now, of course, part of the reason for that debt being run up was the stimulus packages of the previous year. So that basically it's stimulus begetting more stimulus, bailouts begetting more bailouts. So it's continuing. And, and I say a real concern because ultimately it doesn't help the Greek situation. The Greek situation is that they have spent more than they take in. That's driven their debt up to over 100% of GDP, 115% of GDP. They don't have the funds to pay the people who hold the debt. The people who hold the debt are actually mainly in other parts of Europe, German banks and French banks for the most part. So they don't have the funds to pay the debt held by those banks. This big package just gives them more loans. It gives them loans at a lower interest rate, and it will help lower their interest rate, but it doesn't affect the amount of money they are spending directly and the amount of money they have to pay in debt. So in my view, ultimately, they're going to have to reduce that debt anyway. They're going to have to somehow say to the German banks and the French banks, we're not going to be able to pay all that we owe you. It's going to have to be stretched out, just like people who have overextended themselves on the mortgage, somehow it's going to get stretched out. Same thing is going to happen with Greece, but it's not happening yet. We're just pushing this down the road, and the extra money here is, again, going to just be more debt that's being created. Even worse, and this is the next item on my list, the European Central Bank, the Fed of Europe, has agreed to participate in this bailout. And so now their central bank is going to buy the bonds of Greece and Portugal and Spain, any country that's having trouble servicing its debt, and the debt is being brought down in value, and the interest rates on the debt increasing so much. So the European Central Bank, which is the bank in charge of the Eurozone, that one single currency in Europe that Greece is part of, it is going to be purchasing those bonds in order to help that country. How do they purchase the bonds? Just like the U.S. purchases mortgage-backed securities, just like the Fed purchased its mortgage-backed securities I mentioned a few minutes ago, by creating money, potentially inflationary, potentially losing the credibility that that central bank has. 5 days before the European Central Bank agreed to start purchasing these securities, it said it wouldn't purchase these securities, so it changed on a dime, most likely because it was pressured by the European governments to participate. Okay, then finally, the last thing on my list is back to the United States. Believe it or not, our Federal Reserve has participated in this bailout in Europe. How has it participated? It's agreed to give loans to the European Central Bank. So the European Central Bank can provide loans to banks in Europe. So it gives dollar loans. So far it's just been about $9 billion. Imagine $9 billion being a small amount. So far it's been just about $9 billion. But it really has involved our central bank with this operation, this bailout operation in Europe. And then potentially, of course, those loans to the European Central Bank have to be financed by creating more money in the United States, which is what has happened as a result of $9 billion roughly created. Okay, so that's it. That's the big deviation. And actually, I could go on. That's the sad part. I could mention other kinds of interventions. I could mention GM. I could mention Chrysler. I could go on and have a longer list. But that's my 10 items. I may have miscounted, but